stagecoach road which I know very little about, that made its way through here. And you can see the contours of the land and kind of figure out why it went where it did. But it went into Warren and then kind of came back up around probably to Swansea and Rehoboth and other places. But you can still periodically see, as you're walking through the woods, see what might be the remnants of the road cool. Once in a while. So, but it kind of tracked right along through here. But it's a pretty cool little farm, about 80 acres. And he sold most of the rest of that off for housing development just to the north of it. We have a good relationship with them as well in terms of visiting and walking and all. One of his granddaughters lives on the property now with her partner, and they're doing some agricultural work, but they're fitting it in with everything else they're doing, so it's we'll see what happens with it. The reason I wanted to stop here mostly, though, there's a pretty good chance that this was part of the original grant. So back to, again, just kind of thinking about that. We're going to walk up here, and you can see this big spine of stone. Yeah. We're going to walk over this tiny little rise and be down in a little valley, and then you're going to see another big spine of stone, 100 yards that way. And the way that the geography is here is these big spines of glacial rock, basically, pop up, run for a few hundred yards, quarter mile, half mile, then they dive back down, and the one next to it pops up right where this one goes under, and they just kind of do this undulating, and that goes all the way from pretty far north from here, probably at least 10 miles north, all the way down to the top of Narragansett Bay. It's just, so a lot of the way this land ends up being used and where good land and not so good land is really defined by that. If the myths are true, and they're myths, a lot of folklore, not much substantial evidence, the place we're going to visit, Margaret's Rock, one of the stories is that a lot of the burial of the Pokanoket band happened right here. One is as precise as 240 paces to the west, which would be literally right in the middle of this little grove. Wow. I've carefully and appropriately peeked around in there. Apparently there was an anthropology group that came out and did a little digging a while back, and nothing meaningful has ever been found. It's also the case that if this was a burial ground before European contact, there might not be anything metal or whatever that would have survived, 500 years, 100 years. But theoretically, right down in there was a burial ground, and I don't know if it was connected to the epidemics that happened 1615s, early middle 1620s, and very good chance that it was, or at least somewhere in this locale. So we'll just head on up. All right, come on.
Battery's about to go.
So northeast would be?
Northeast is over there. This wind today is out of the northwest, which is where most of the really fierce weather comes from. And then the prevailing wind is southwest, and where we get sort of summer rain. And this little rise right here is just enough to keep that from coming in that ridge over there. So we can talk about this if you want a little bit, or we can also, there's a little trail right here we can go and just take a peek. Why don't we do that first, just so we don't forget to do it. So I'll lead you up there, but there's a little area that I'm guessing is where, at least if I were going to put a winter village in here, would probably be a really good place to do it. But you can kind of start to imagine why this location was. How far are we from the sea right now? You're not very much. The Warren River is right, like because they always in the winter, like the Narragansett always move inland away. They're just far enough away they can still tell things, but they're deep. They're in deep. Yeah. But they're it's probably, I would say, a mile that way, mile that way. Sure. And there's a swamp over here for fresh water access, which is really as well.
Is this the ridge line over
But this is the ridge line. So Margaret's Rock is right there.
Yeah.
It comes up, steps up, a little flat, steps up again, and then you can see another step up.
Right.
So whether this is it, one of the myths is that Margaret's Rock was a place with steps, natural steps in the rock, and this arguably fits that. It's arguable for sure.
Is this the high point of the land?
More or less. Yeah, there's others that are about the same. So there's one that's probably another 20, 30 feet higher right over by the farm. That story about that is it used to be one of the signal rocks. There was a series of fire and light reflection posts that could go from Worcester down to wherever pretty quickly, and that was so it's a little higher and a little more open around it. But this ridge right here, it's one of those spines, and it goes about a half mile and then just disappears, and another one pops up a little ways from it.
Well, just from what I know and have learned about the Indians in writing my book, I've never been here before, but this, to my mind, and I often take walks in the woods on the other side of the bay in Narragansett country, and this, to my mind, would be an absolutely priceless place. I mean, Indians coming in here would definitely view this place as a winter home with a major landmark, a high ridge, major water nearby, and here you're protected in this little draw here.
Yep.
So if the Indians weren't here, they should have been.
And the other thing is, this part of the Pokanoket lands always under a little pressure with the Narragansetts. They kind of, you'd know more, Jamie, but they kind of got along, sometimes didn't, pushing back and forth. And so being able to see people coming and defend yourself easily, this is also, and I'm not a military person, but this looks like a really easily defensible spot.
Well, I am a military person, and it is a defensible position with this high ground here and good. Yeah, I mean, for sure, that's another reason why I was saying, because they look for defensible places.
And right over here,
Sport.
you can see some more rocks popping up. So you've actually got some protection going both directions. Pretty bumpy to get into from either end. So,
and just briefly, I mean, the Narragansetts and the Wampanoags are known to have quarreled over land from the very head of the bay where Roger Williams settled down over here. There was a constant. I mean, the bands would switch from one federation to the other, and it was definitely there. I mean, I know Roger Williams, for instance, made agreements with Massasoit or Osamequin and Canonicus and Miantinomi. We're pretty sure that he made agreements with both of them, with both tribes, for the land in Providence, just so there was no trouble. And indeed, there was never any trouble. The settlement in Providence was really never quarreled over. The Indians never claimed either the Wampanoags or the Narragansetts never challenged the ownership of Providence that we know of. And we probably would know if they had. So. We don't know the population figures exactly, but in 1636. It's a good bet that the size of the Narragansett Confederation was about 7,500 to 10,000, and the size of the Pokanokets, the Wampanoags, was at the most 1,000.
Wow.
So there's a huge difference, and that's why, I think by 1633, there were Keith mentioned earlier, there were two health disasters, problems in 1616 to 1619, and the Wampanoags were hit very badly, and the Narragansetts not at all. Narragansett Bay was the boundary, so nothing on the west side they were not hit at all. Then in 1633 there was a smallpox epidemic, and the Narragansetts were hit by that as well, but everybody was hit by that. But that was less severe, considerably less severe. But the power structure. At the time of Williams's settling of Providence, the power structure was, the Narragansetts were in the ascendancy, and the Wampanoags were seriously, underdogs. But I don't think the conflict, so far as we can tell, the conflict was very localized, and it was not a major battle. We don't have any records of major battles. We do have a very concrete record of a Narragansett raid on Soames in the 1620s, which was turned back, interestingly enough. And that is part of the historical record. I can't be more detailed because I'm a writer, not a historian. So my head's filled with Vietnam, and but there was in 1621 or 2. There was a party of Narragansetts went into the main village in Soames and took over part of it at least, and then there was a counterattack apparently. But so that's and you don't read. I haven't read, and I've read a lot of it. You don't read of many of actual conflict between the. There are no records of actual fights, major battles. Yeah,
right.
If my memory serves. It's definitely true. The Wampanoags went to Plymouth to get help for this when the Narragansetts came into this village. And anyway, I may be misleading you a little bit.
No, I think I remember hearing that as well.
Yeah, there's a historical incident of some importance. I tell a very truncated version of it in as a part of my history of the Narragansetts, my overview. But it's interesting because it really is grounded in reality. This is not a myth. This happened. So anyway, that's.
Is there any documentation from Roger Williams himself for this site?
Not that I know of.
There's supposed to be mention in one of his journals of him coming here and staying, but it's 2 sentences in the middle of. I was leaving there, a lot of detail. I arrived here, a lot of detail.
The Indians suckered me. But where they did it and when exactly, we don't know. Sometime between early January and we believe Providence was settled about on the 3rd week of April. Mm-hmm. They made it. They crossed the Seekonk, and they as we all probably know, or most of us, Roger Williams initially settled on the Plymouth side of the Seekonk River. And they actually began planting, and then Winslow, right, and then Winslow politely but firmly said, "Get your butt over across the river."
Right.
So you'd be safer there, as indeed he was.
Yeah.
The Slate Rock, area the corner of Plymouth and the corner of Gano and William Street. That's where they have the rock,
right?
But that is largely conjectural.
Sure.
In 1893, in an effort to clear that out, they blew the rock up. so that was a little one of Providence's many errors. I think for sure the river was where they're pretty. That's all landfill.
Right.
That part of Providence, right? But I'm sure that. It was somewhere along there, but again, where we don't know.
You go straight across from where he was, out the cove, the back cove, straight across. You're right at Blackstone, area.
Yeah.
And there's plenty of landing space.
Yeah.
So it's gone straight across.
Yeah, and we don't really know about Williams. Most people think, and the version I chose to tell was that he initially came down and wintered with either alone or with Thomas Angel, who was his servant. And probably if he were here, that would be it. But when he got down to the Seekonk, he was joined by probably half of those 13 families that made up Providence.
So it's not clear.
We don't know when Mary came down and with their first child. We don't know, but certainly. Everybody who tells the story believes it was in the first year. I mean, we know that. But,
so part of what complicates it from a more environmental point of view, as Jamie mentioned, different bands of the Wampanoag lost different percentages in these epidemics, but they'd probably lost somewhere 50 to 70% of the population. So best guess would be maximum 250 people probably wintering here, right?
Yeah.
So not big. They're weakened in a lot of different ways to begin with. And then if you have even 24 people come and stay with you, you've just increased the demand on your resources by 10% at a very poor time of the year to be feeding people.
Yeah.
And so, I think for me, one of the really interesting questions that I will never know the answer to is if Roger Williams showed up by himself that's one thing. If you showed up with other people, it's something different. But I wonder how much surplus the group that was here had in reserve that allowed them to be hospitable, or if it was more of a political calculus, or just culturally, this is like somebody shows up, you feed them, like, you know. So it could be any or all of those.
On the last point, of course, William's book, Key and Language of America, speaks to this issue of Indian hospitality, where he was, praised the Indians in general, the Indians in this area, Algonquin, Pequot, whatever, for allowing strangers to come in. Where other people, Christians, and other people, and Europeans turned people away, the Indians were much more open and willing to help not only strangers, but other members of their band. He praised very much their personal ethics.
Did anyone see it? There was a copy of the key on display at the little Roger Williams Park. No one saw it?
You mean down at the National Park in Providence? You mean the
little one that was on display yesterday from 4 to 8.
Oh, really?
And I went to see it, and there was a guy
That's the one that's
who
normally in the John Brown?
Yes.
John Hay.
No,
John
it's not
Hay.
the John Hay. It's the John Carter Brown Library.
Oh, one of those. It's at Brown.
John Carter Brown Library is the best library.
And they had it displayed. There was a guy who we should really try to get, John McNiff.
Oh, he's fantastic.
Terrific.
Yeah, he's like a
the guy
disciple.
there? Yeah.
Yeah.
the guy that
We
did
just saw him.
The Ranger.
Came and
Copy
talked.
Museum.
Yeah.
As a matter of fact, I've got to go
He's
give him a
amazing.
copy of my book.
Amazing.
When I first started researching it in 2007, I went and had a great chat with him, and he really
amazing.
he got me fired up.
I have a
Yeah,
picture of him on my phone.
yeah. He's really. I got to go give him a copy of my book and thank him for all his service, because he's the man about Roger
And
Williams.
he was giving an introduction to it
Yeah.
and pointing out different things to people. It was
Can I
fascinating.
ask one more question? In my beginning understanding of this, where Roger Williams was given permission by the Indians to be on Roger Williams Ave there by Mega Pond, that would have been in the purview of the Seekonk Wampanoags in the Seekonk Plain. So would they also have worked with Tokanakets to help him be there?
There's no reference that I know of in Williams's, certainly in Williams's
You met him?
correspondence. There's no reference to any agreement with Indians for the other side of the Seekonk River, for the Plymouth side of the Seekonk, for that when they initially settled there. I don't know who claimed sovereignty over that land among the Indians. But it's a very good point, very interesting question, because
The Seekonks claim that they settled from, am I right, David?
Yeah.
Pawtucket, where there was a fording place, down to Wachamoket, where
Yep.
there was a fording place. And their claim went all the way to Taunton on what was called the Seekonk Plain. That would put Roger Williams right in the middle of them.
yeah. No, but how big could they be, though? I mean, how many of them could there be? I mean, probably 50. I mean, there can't be more than 50 Seekonk Indians. At least according to the records. I mean, these tribes. I mean, these are bands, not tribes. They're small units. And I don't know what you think, but if there are probably 10 or 12 other bands that had names of Indians that were in the Wampanoag Federation, but we don't know about.
Partly population would drive that, but
They're part of the Nash
but I think
Yeah.
right. So, but thinking through the other, just sort of basic human politics in a way. If you're not real strong and you don't have large population growth, maybe even net loss, not a lot of expansion pressure, borders between different groups are likely to be pretty soft and permeable. So you get intermarriage, you get we talked about this last time, this notion of usufruct rights. So rather than an ownership of land, it would be the different rights to use parts of it. So my guess, and this is just a kind of educated guess, is that this tribe would want to use this land for X, this band would want to use it for Y, and rather than going to war with each other, they would leave this as kind of a amorphous border and say, okay, you get to use this, you get to use that. Just
Well, that's what
Yeah.
Hunts Mills probably
Yeah.
was. It
And
had
it-
claim, all the tribes had claimed to him.
And so I think of it
That's
as
the Webster Lake thing, right? You fish on your side, you will fish on our
well,
side.
right, and
Nobody
it's sort of
fishes,
the borders are always the most dangerous place to be, and so that if you can create kind of a gray zone, it's a really good peacekeeping tool, and especially if you can kind of negotiate out, instead of European notions of ownership, just neighbors' right to use. It's more. It's kind of how the farm works here. I mean, nobody owns the road you drive in on, but everybody is responsible for it, and we holler at each other's friends who drive too fast. It's kind of
It's better documented historically the relationship between the Niantics and the Narragansetts, where they're thought of as separate tribes, but by King Philip's War they're one tribe. But interestingly enough, the Niantics would not join in King Philip's War. They remained neutral, even though Ninigret was the primary diplomatic envoy of the Narragansetts, but he was the one of 4 or 5 major Narragansett sachems who said, we're not going to go fight we're not going to go fight the colonists. We're going to remain neutral, and he did remain. And that's why the Narragansett tribe is where it is, because after King Philip's War, because the Niantic Indians had remained neutral, they were left alone down there. They were given a certain amount of space, and that's what then Indians, refugees, Narragansetts, Wampanoags, Pequots, they all gravitated toward Charleston and that reservation down there, because that group, that sub-band, if you want to call it one of the sub-bands of the Narragansett Confederation, because they had remained neutral in against the war, where the Narragansetts had gone. Well, the Narragansetts had gone to where they were attacked, so they had good reason to go.
One of the things I was curious, I've been curious about, reading your book, I got more curious about why were the Wampanoag or the Pokanoket the ones that pulled the trigger that started King Philip's War, rather than somebody more politically important, or
the Narragansetts were by far and away considered to be the biggest security threat to the colonies, to the New England Confederation, by far and away, because of their numbers, their wealth, their leadership. There had been in 1640. There had been a major effort by my Antonome. He lost his head because he tried to build an alliance as a counterweight, a bulwark against the growing strength of the Puritans. To answer your question, Keith, in short, and my fellow Brown graduate, Nat Philbrick, talked about this at length. The Wampanoags, King, to put it bluntly, King Philip they were so closed in. They were basically, the land deals were, the tribe kept losing land, and they were down to almost nothing. And the Puritans were really sticking it to them. You can't have guns, you can't do this, you can't do that. And basically, King Philip just, had enough. And the young, as you can expect, the younger Indians, they had been since the 1660s just dying to go on the war path against the predations of the Puritans, were just driven them to this deep and abiding hatred. And there's that famous speech, that Osamequin gives, and I believe that's a real speech, where he basically says, when you guys came, my father helped you out, and we worked together, and now, you're just totally screwing us over. I mean, to put it.
That's what Philip said.
Right.
Yeah.
Philip, right.
So it's in this kind of tinderbox, but it's really a spontaneous event rather than we're trying to create some sort of political movement behind. I mean, that was the hope.
Well, most people think that there was a lot of talk among the Indian tribes. Interestingly enough, the Narragansetts and Ninigret talked to their arch enemy, Uncas, who they'd been fighting for 40 years, in a major fight. But they talked about the problem of the Puritans and what to do about it. So there'd really been talk of alliances of the Indians in this area in southern New England. There'd been talk on and off for 30 years about what to do about these.
So it's not a random event.
So it's not a random. Yeah, and wouldn't we love to know, Keith? Wouldn't we love to know exactly how the plotting unfolded, whether it was a spontaneous? You can't call it spontaneous in the sense that they were just being pressured and pressured and pressured, and something had to blow. I mean,
they weren't the only ones.
yeah, that's right. So it happened, and then that's the King Philip's War. That was the end of Indian cultural and political power for 300 years.
Yeah.
So but yeah, all fascinating stuff. I wish we knew more about it. So much of it is conjecture.
Well, in the timing of some of this too, just back to this place. So the Mason family probably arrived on this land in the 1680s, and it would have been right in the heels of King Philip's War, because before that, this is, again, the myth, this is called Margaret's Rock because this is where the last Pokanoket person in the area lived. So the story is she was the last living Pokanoket, and this is where she lived until she died or went into his house in old age. So this would have been unavailable to the Mason family safely probably until after King Philip's War. That's when it came in. And then there was in 1696 a lot of pushing and shoving about, cases made to the king's government in England about who was going to get the deeds for this. Then they get a deed, and then they're in. So there's this kind of romantic idea that the Mason family was here from 1685 until almost 1985. So pretty much 300 years. And
Which Mason was that?
Is it John Mason from Connecticut, or? Because the Masons in Connecticut.
no, I don't think it is John. I've got it. I forget.
Samuel Mason?
I want to say George.
Yeah, because there were Masons who were members of the church in the 1660s.
That part of it I do not know. It'd be really interesting to
And
know.
Nat Taylor and some people from Barrington Preservation Center, they did deed histories all the way back to 1650 on all of this area. So they
Where are those stored now?
in my Dropbox.
I would love to see those.
But they actually belong to Nat, so and to one of the other people. But do you know Nat Taylor? He's currently the president of the Barrington Preservation Society. I think there's reams of the stuff, so you might want to approach him for some of that.
Yeah, so it would be really interesting to know more precisely.
Because we did the research on the First Baptist meeting house in North America, which was ours. Not Providence, not Newport. But we had
always
1667.
So you say.
We have documentation. Anyway, but it was burned as the conflagration erupted there in 1675. So,
Yeah, I think it was, for some reason, George is the name that sticks in my mind, and I haven't seen
Because
George anywhere else.
by 1680 there was another Baptist church that was supposedly gathered around the Mason family. And they were General Baptists as opposed to Calvinist Baptists.
And
Of course, the Baptists are famous for multiplying by dividing. Right?
That's a reputation that grew up a little later,
Yeah.
like 2 years later.
Yeah.
The first one was at Knockham Hill,
right,
which
Barrington.
Four Town Farms, yes.
Oh.
And they're pretty clear because of the research they did. The second one was at Tyler's Point. Then they drew that building up the river and tore it down, built a new
Was
one.
the cemetery on Tyler's Point then?
Pardon?
Was the
That's where
cemetery
John
part of-
Miles is. That's where his rock is. Supposedly, that's where his remains are. So. There was considerable conflict between those people who remained congregational in Barrington and those who had founded the town of Swansea about what do they call it? Orthodox and learned ministers, which Samuel Luther wasn't. He signed with an X, but he was our pastor for 20-some years.
I want to do a little more serious climb of about just 25 feet. We can go right up to the top of this little ridge and get a great view and
Sure.
see some more of how it's all laid out. There's a
To the top.
sort of little path right here.
For hunting.
Canopy of trees would have been profoundly different. This would have been almost all bigger oak, beech, and white pine.
Shaded but empty underneath.
Also,
Yeah.
if this were a winter settlement, which it almost certainly was only a winter settlement, the farming was usually done closer to the coast on the plains.
Okay.
So, and that would start in March. They would start to move, I guess. Usually, that was what I remember.
And it could have been right down here, it
That's
could have been
right.
on the other side of the highway, the road. But there's also, and it's kind of, I'm not sure when, because the other direction you can go, in addition to the Warren River, which is, an estuary right there, you can head down to the mouth of the Kickamuit just down here, and it'd be interesting. That's another thing that would be interesting to know. But I guessed it was somewhere not too far from here in different seasonal. This is also really, really good land for foraging. The amount of different types of nutrients that you can get, just edibles. This fall has been a rare fall just because of the weather pattern, but I counted, I think, 25 different kinds of mushrooms coming up.
Wow.
And I don't know them well enough to eat them, but there are 5 or 6 of those that are really edible. There's all kinds of, just almost anything in here would have some sort of utility for that. So,
Well, this whole area, I mean, for the Narragansett country, this side of the bay, wonderful in terms of resources for people to survive, and as the Indians did. I mean, they just in all seasons things were available, they lived beautifully. I mean, they lived off the land without robbing the land. They had a very successful lifestyle in the north, here in the Northeast, and particularly I'm woefully ignorant about the east side of the bay, the specifics of it, but it's not that different than the west side and the Indians over there. And I mean, all I can think, one of the reasons the Narragansett was so successful was because of their location. Near the bay with ponds, estuaries, the forests. They were wonderfully, full and so many resources were available at all seasons.
It really is. Are there any other?
So, Keith, I have one question for you about these initial outbursts and firefights and so on in King Philip's War. How many of them are documented over here? I mean, do we know where the actual?
You'd know more because there's Martin's house in Barrington and the church are probably 2 of the best known, mostly because they got written about and they.
What about this Garrison house? I know Miles.
That was right at at Miles Bridge.
Right.
If you go to the old Providence Pike and you go by our meeting house, turn left, it's 3/4 of a mile. It's Miles Bridge. If you go just over that, there's a road that goes down this way. On the right, there's a big monument stone.
Have the archaeologists done any digs over here?
The house
They've
was
played around with it a little bit.
Yeah, the house lasted until 1913. It was not burned.
Right.
There are a couple of guys that are out here with metal detection equipment all the time, and they're just a couple of guys with metal detection equipment, but and they're history buffs.
Sure.
But they have found little musket balls, and they found shoe buckles. I think they found the solid silver shoe buckles. Big fine spoons, but not much beyond that. It's pretty. But and you kind of got at this, I think, in your book a little bit, but word leaked out is what it sounds like, and so most of the English who didn't just run away did group up in a few different places.
Yes, they did.
So there weren't farms got burned, houses got burned, but there weren't people in them, and so the stories are all written about where they had grouped up. Is my sense.
Because there are a few places that we know of on the west side of the bay that absolutely Nine Man's Misery near Cumberland. That's a real place where they know that there was a major fight there, and of course the Great Swamp. But we don't know in the swamp. We don't know where that fight took place. There's a lot of stuff that's come up through the centuries, But I mean, unless they're not telling me, and I have pretty good contacts with these people in the Rhode Island Historical Society. They own that land now, the
Great Swamp.
the Great Swamp land, where
The tribe doesn't own it?
the tribe doesn't own it now.
Actually, it is known where that took place.
You think so?
There's a big monument.
I know.
Well,
No,
the
that's
monument
not-
is the monument. It's what's no. The major fact about the monument is that it's not near the battle.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. So, but where? So, well, you're the first person in
Yeah.
6 years of research that I've heard.
I know.
Yeah.
I stumbled upon this guy who, actually, I've told you about this, Dave. He's going to take me down there.
Right. Better bring me with you.
I
maybe
couldn't
proprietary.
wait for him, and I tried like an idiot to go. I knew he had told me exactly where it was, and I tried to go through it. He had told me you have to go by boat.
Yeah.
And I thought,
Well, it was a frozen.
I can
It's
get
not
through
that
there.
bad. Yeah.
I almost drowned in mud, but
Wow.
I got to. By the time I got to the area, I was so exhausted I had to swim back. But I know generally where it is, and he is going to take me.
Because I'll tell you,
And the reason he knows that it's right is because there have been archaeologists who have been there, and they're keeping it hush.
yeah.
But he
until
said there
they're
were
done.
clear markers, and it really is. The
Because
site.
my understanding is that they're actively pursuing it, but they still haven't found it. But as you point, that may very well be just trying to keep
Right,
people
we
off.
hear about it 5 years later.
Yeah,
Right.
so that people don't go in there and start hunting around.
Right.
But I think part of Dave's vision for this Solons group is that we can start to map out some of these and map them out sort of geographically, but also time, because there's a lot of, one of the things that's been really confusing to me is that a lot of the things that are reported to have happened, they don't make chronological sense,
No.
or they're kind of turned inside out, and just be fun to start getting all that laid out in a
So,
Establishing-
timeline project.
Establishing chronologies is extremely difficult. I mean, in this entire era, and very often the historian is confronted with 3 bits of evidence, and they're all contradictory. I mean, they're the best, the best
sorry.
things that we have. So, yeah, it's tricky, but I mean, I have the sense, walking around. I mean, this is a classic case. Sometimes I'm walking over near the swamp or in South County in the woods, and and I look, and all of a sudden I say, "There's no question on God's earth that the Indians were here, that they were settled in this particular place." And you develop
You
a
can feel it.
sense for it. You
Yeah.
feel it. You feel.
Yeah.
And actually, one of the reasons I wrote this book was because when I was a kid, my father was a professor at URI, and this is in the early '60s. And I remember, going around with my parents in when South County was really, the population was much lower than it is now. I mean, there was nobody there in the winter. And I actually felt I kept thinking, and I remember walking with my uncle, who was a colonel in the U.S. Army, and he would say, watch out for the Indians, Jamie. Watch out, they're here. And he was right. I mean, he'd seen a lot of combat. He said,
I feel that way about this place.
yeah, I'm sure you do. Yeah, there's a sense. Yeah,
There is
and I think that sense should be trusted. I
Good
think.
to hear.
Yeah,
Good to hear.
yeah.
The sun's coming out right now. Slightly fewer trees. You can feel it. Like this, we're out of the wind.
Yeah.
It's drainage is good, so this is always dry. You've got the sun coming in. Like this, it's
Right.
probably 10 degrees warmer right here than when we go back out. It's just
Protected. That's
just-
in the draw. They sought this kind of protection, and you're right. You can feel it here. This place is
feels really hospitable.
imminently exactly. It's
So if we walked about a half mile that way, we'd come to another big rock outcropping called Devil's Rock. It shows up. It's big enough to show up on maps and things. And the stories I've heard about that are a little bit more modern. That stagecoach road that I mentioned also at different times invited highwaymen to come in, and they would rob the stagecoach or people along the road, and then that's where they would set up camp.
Yeah,
And
you
if
just mentioned fresh water.
Yeah, and if you go up there, you can really see why it's 5 people could protect that from an army. I mean, it's just really fortress-like. And then just behind that on the other side is really big swamp, and there's a stream that comes out of that swamp. It runs into the river. The stream that you can see on our property, in the little pond we walk past, those are actually built by the farmers probably as late as 1930s. And happily for our purposes, they're considered ditches, not streams, so we don't have to do the go through all the water conservation stuff, wetland stuff. We respect it anyway, but it's so.
Is there spring on this property?
Lots of springs, yeah. And the other, so I can show you back when we're over back towards our house, but the other thing that's every geology from glaciers is a little bit different. And so what happens here that's different on the West Bay, this would be significant, I think. On the West Bay, it's kind of like Connecticut River Valley. It's like 10 feet of topsoil. It's gorgeous. Like
Best farmland in
I grew up on Cape Cod where 3 inches was a big. Like when I went to school at UMass, I thought I'd gone to heaven. It was like unbelievable. So here we have about 18 inches to 2 feet of really good topsoil, but then there's about a 2-inch layer of clay, and then there's sand and other. So what happens here is in any low spots, it's not necessarily swampy or even boggy, but all this rain we just had now saturates. You can actually see running water across
So
the
it hits
top
that
of it.
clay and
just,
can't go any further.
But then it's gone into lower spots, and it's within 2 days it's dried back out. So it's pretty, and it's just really different. So these swampy areas, there's a lot of them that are only here for a couple of days at a time, and then you get into really, really boggy, nasty stuff like you almost.
These are qualified as vernal pools in spring?
They mostly
No, I
wouldn't.
didn't know.
Yeah, if I wanted to put in a shallow well, I could do 6-foot well and have water 9 months of the year. So it's a real high water table right there.
I also have to say, back in 2003, I spent about a month in Marine Corps infantry school. I'm not as a journalist for writing a book, and this is what they call a superior defensive position. I mean, it's just so perfectly laid out. I mean, this would be where you'd make your stand if you had to defend an area. This is just perfect ground. Cover the flanks. I mean, it's just, yeah. I mean, it's ideal. This is. Yeah, I mean, I guess the Marines would set up here.
See, like this seepage right here is always, that's in another little one in there. 12 months of the year, no matter how dry. And this is just compressed rock, it's not granite, so yeah, it breaks off periodically.
Would they have
these little
built
chunk
something
surfaces.
across the face of this?
Well, my speculative again, but if I were going to spend the winter here,
I would.
I would
Add on a
use this
couple of
little V up here as a chimney, and put whoever I was taking care of inside of that and get a fire going. Without Mark, probably his standing, and the reflective heat over time would keep that as cozy and dry as you could.
John McNiff told me last night that, first of all, this apparently was longer ledge.
Okay.
And secondly, just like what you're saying, Keith, that when he was on a dig, they went and spent a good amount of time under a ledge like this, and they built a fire right at the edge of the ledge. And he said inside, even though it was winter time, cold as hell, he said that they had to take off their jackets and be in short sleeves because it was that warm inside.
Wow.
I've done some camping, year-round camping, and that's kind of a nice little.
So which is more important about this area, the tradition, the indigenous peoples, or the traditions about Roger Williams?
Neither. What do you think? I mean, they're
I
both
don't,
good.
yeah, I don't know how you'd separate them. Like I was saying about the sign that's right here, I'm not offended by it, but this wasn't Roger Williams' shelter. This was whatever the Pokanoket called it for 6,000 years before that in the Middle East. And it's not what Roger Williams would have called it. And Margaret was not her born name. It was something else. So there's all. But as an artifact of this history, that makes sense. And it's very welcome. But there's 98% of the history that's not even bits and not. So I wouldn't want it to be something that took over this space, but if there was some way, like just a little QR thing that people could hit on their phones or something that sort of popped them into that whole history, particularly if young people come out here.
Yeah.
You know,
I think that's critical. Transition.
in the academy, you know, they develop a kind of particular language to discuss it. I'm not from the academy. I mean, I just have a BA in I'm a writer. But they talk about this is a classic case of this is a site of the great encounter between the white people and the Indians. So it's shared. I mean, ideally, this is a classic shared site, right? I mean, it should be about the interaction and also what's wonderful about, I mean, here they're succoring and protecting Roger Williams, and isn't that a wonderful? It's very symbolic of the early period, you know. You know, that's how the scholars tend to talk about it, you know, as a way of, you know, sort of not privileging, as they say, you know, one story over another. But the English, you know, 60 years ago, this would all be about, it's just about Roger Williams and the Indians, but it's mainly about Roger Williams. But now it's much more even-handed. I mean, people would tend to discuss it, you know, in a broader context, which is all to the good, I think, you know? It's all to the good.
I've also you know, the third player in it that I'm personally as interested in is the land itself and what's been happening with it. And you know, I bring colleagues, Doug's of mine from Providence College and a couple of other places out who are field biologists, who are botanists, who know food, and you know, they can talk about the history of this land and all of those terms, and that's fascinating, particularly as you start to think about what's going to happen over the next 20 to 50 years, just
also the
chronologically.
The way that English people conceived of land and land use versus the way Indians conceived of it, that's a really powerful way of looking at the history of their interaction. You know, you must know Bill Cronin's book, right? Yeah, famous. I mean,
Had a huge impact on my thinking.
I didn't even have to ask that, really. I knew that you knew it. Because, yeah, you're like a Bill Cronin disciple, as I am. I just think, you know, that's a book I should recommend to everybody.
What is it?
Changes in the
For
Land.
those of us who aren't disciples,
Yeah.
Yeah, and it's been around. What came out in the 80s?
82.
I believe so.
It's by Bill Cronin is a professor, a brilliant professor at the University of Wisconsin-Madison. And I think he's still teaching. He'd be a little older.
Getting up there now.
Yeah, he's probably 70.
Changes
in the Land. It's New England landscape and how it's changed by the Indians and the encounter, how it's changed by the encounter that I just mentioned. Absolutely one of my top 5 books about if you're going to get introduced to this area, you know, and what's going on.
It's the driest subject told in the most enthralling way.
Yeah.
It's just, you can't, history book you can't put down.
Yeah, I quote him a few times, at least once in my book, and he had a profound effect.
And part of the excitement of reading it, and part of my pleasure in this place is he provides some basic information in a way that all of a sudden these things that never made sense to me as a kid growing up, you know, like, this is, you can start to see the logic model that actually humanizes everybody involved. It makes the land a player.
It's one of the greatest works of American history since World War II. I mean, and I think almost anybody in any field in American history would tell you that. It's a classic, and it's also, it's very readable. I mean, it really is. It's wonderfully readable. So, anyway, there's my plug for his book.
the wind is so strong here, we're all protected.
Yeah. Anybody want to spend the rest of the week here?
Can I? Can I bring?
He had a prior relationship that made it a safe place for him to go.
When Roger was
because of his relationship.
when Roger was a teacher in Plymouth, that's when he was
Right.
creating
He
a
was
relationship.
trading and
And so he knew the people. I mean, if you're walking in the winter, you're not going to go a whole long way without some help. So
And it would make sense.
he
I mean,
would probably met people further up who then said, go down, pass them along.
But not to complicate the situation, but I often wondered, I mean, most of the travel by Europeans was done by boat. And certainly in the good weather, if he were going, he'd probably go by pinnace or a small boat. But everybody seems to think that he came in the winter, that he would come by land, even though it was...
But if he's coming from Salem, he could have easily done it.
Very cold.
Yeah, he could have. I mean, a theory, it always struck me, well, certainly if this had been June, old Roger would have come down by boat. He was an experienced... he come down and made connections with the Narragansetts in 1632, 1633 time. So that's when he met the Narragansetts. So, you'd expect him to come by boat had the weather been better. But but nobody, no historian that I know of in any era has held anything but that he came through by land.
It seems incredible to me that
6 winters.
he wasn't expected down here.
Yeah.
That the Indians knew that he was on the move and they were watching and reporting.
It could very well be one of the most astonishing things from my research is the speed of communication among these people, these isolated little villages, in the way that rumors travel. In 2-3 days, what they know in Providence, and 3 days later, 2 days later, they know in Boston. You'd think it'd be much slower, but news mattered like crazy, because these are people. Every little outpost is an island, and everybody's looking to know, what's going on, and so they're Indian runners, and then I don't know when they had horses who were doing the runs on the Indian Pass, but it's really astonishing how quickly information got passed from one place to another, from Indian village to...
And there's signal rocks, this whole big chain of signal rocks too, and I don't know how sophisticated the communication on those could be or how detailed.
I'd never heard of
And back to where's the road, so our tendency is to think of this as the woods and it's kind of wild, but if you think of this as kind of your living room, and so there would have been a main path going through, but all this was tended and used every day with...
So it's fairly clear.
So probably would be burned off seasonally or every so often.
So if you saw the village, you'd be able to see all the...
Yeah, we were talking really the tree canopy would be mostly big birches, oaks, white pines, so none of this scrubby stuff. And that changes the way you can see. There's even now a really big deer population. That would have been a primary. We've got.
Well, in the winter they tended to burn stuff out, and then so they could do these big hunts. Yeah. Apparently, mostly in the winter. I gather that's my.
That's
sense.
what I've heard.
Yeah.
So,
and
so this would have been an entire network,
right.
and a small population of people, but continuous use of it. This time we're going to go straight out this little path here, and then just bend to the left. Takes it up to one of the fields. Get it?
It was part of my homecoming. I came back from New York in 2005, and
Yeah, butternut?
That's a walnut.
It's a walnut?
It's an English walnut.
just
Walnut.
These are black walnut trees.
Black walnut?
We used to have them. Actually, that's what you needed. And there's not a lot.
Someday.
I'd love to. We can. I'd love to. Yeah. Let's be in touch, and we can. Sure. I'm up at the Library of Brown. I can always hop over to PC.
Or just meet downtown.
Yeah. Sure. That'd be great.
That'd be awesome.
Thank you
Yeah,
very much.
it's
And
good.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
many blessings.